Hello, greetings everyone, and thank you for tuning in to another installment of Civil Defense. I've not been on for about 3 weeks, no, not 3 weeks, 1 week, because basically I've run into technological difficulties. Facebook has banned me for a month, um, banned me for a month regarding live broadcasts because I said something about the Taliban that they didn't like. I think I said something like I had wished the Taliban success in their efforts to lead Afghanistan, and they thought that that was something wrong with that. I mean, there are people there. The Taliban are in charge, and for the sake of those people, yes, I do hope that the Taliban start to do a good job. I can't figure out what's wrong with that. Wouldn't anybody want that? So anyway, this got me booted off Facebook Live. For some reason, any positive mention of the Taliban, uh, I think they're probably considered a terrorist group or something. But when the U.S. left Afghanistan, they left it in the hands of the Taliban. Now, all I hope is that they do a good job in providing services for the people there. I don't see why they can't do that, especially with international support. So, what is the big deal? Should those people be suffering or in, in total misery because the United States has decreed that the Taliban are not a wholesome organization by the U.S. viewpoint? What authority does the U.S. have? Usually this sort of thing goes through the United Nations. But I don't want to belabor this point since this is a civil defense presentation and it really doesn't deal with international politics, except for the fact that I got booted off Facebook because of this very point. Now, what else do I have to say? Okay, also, I lost my cell phone, so I couldn't really record these sessions and post them on YouTube for a while. But now it seems that I have access to equipment where I can actually make these videos. I do hope they'll show up, fairly well. I hope the sound and audio, I hope the audio will be sufficient to make it not so excruciating to listen to. I'll have to listen to the finished product myself. So basically, here we are, civil defense. My name is Peter Duveen, and I've been having these civil defense programs for about 30 or 35 sessions. I believe this must be about the 35th session. And the purpose of these programs is to highlight the need for civil defense in a world where nuclear weapons are possessed and in a world of heightened tensions between nuclear powers. And that situation certainly exists since America has been picking on Russia for the past 12 to 15 years in a very aggressive and non-diplomatic manner. And Russia, I guess, as these tensions increased and as the U.S. put up the pressure, Russia finally felt the need to send troops into neighboring Ukraine and correct some of the situations that had developed due to the U.S. Getting involved in Ukraine, training radical groups there, which became part of the Ukrainian military, et cetera, and creating uh, a very poor living situation for the eastern part of the country that never accepted the resolution of their president having left the country in 2014, having actually been chased out of the country, leaving the country, at the risk of his life. They lost their president, and this part of the country, the eastern part, never really accepted the new presidents that were elected or anything like that. They decided simply to declare independence from Ukraine. And just recently, Russia finally recognized this bid for independence, or recognized two nations that had declared independence from Ukraine, Lugansk and Donetsk. And then also sent troops in to protect those nations that were being shelled by what is called the Ukrainian military. I don't know if you could really call it that, whatever. You might call it the Kiev regime better, since this regime has control over Kiev. One doesn't need to make a statement as to the legitimacy of any of the power groups that are involved. And by calling it the Ukrainian army, it would certainly indicate that, there was a properly constituted government of Western Ukraine, and that is certainly called into question by these eastern provinces that declared independence, whereas the western part of Ukraine seems to be controlled by a regime that challenges what the eastern part of Ukraine has done and has been shelling those people and trying by force to get them to rejoin whatever it is that the western part is doing. So we have a complicated situation, a tense situation there, and Russia has finally sent troops in to protect that eastern portion of the country. Russia is a nuclear-armed nation and has indicated that they would use nuclear armaments under certain situations, such as if NATO got involved in this conflict, it would turn into a nuclear war. Russia has made statements like that. So here we have, once again, the possibility of a nuclear exchange, the very possibility we have been alerting people to why they should protect themselves in the event of a nuclear exchange, which they might have survived if they are lucky. What should you do after that? This is a very broad topic, civil defense. How does one protect oneself? Well, the first way would be to avoid a nuclear war by making sure that your leaders do everything they can to avoid the nuclear war. That would be a kind of civil defense. Let's not have it happen in the first place. That would be the best way to deal with it. And perhaps there is something that the average person can do. I can't imagine what it is, because these people seem to go on automatic pilot and do whatever they want without regard to what the average American wants. But what the average American can do is protect himself by educating himself as to the nature of nuclear weapons and figure out a kind of plan as to what to do if he is caught in the middle of a nuclear conflagration that he or his family or community survive through. So I just wanted to mention one other thing. I had looked at a Wikipedia article on mutually assured destruction. And apparently, under that doctrine, nations that subscribe to it are not to build any kind of shelters to protect their constituents from a nuclear holocaust, because that would kind of undermine the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. One side might feel that it could get away with lobbing nukes at the other side and run into their protective areas and, get away with it. Well, the idea that both populations of two countries that were nuclear armed were equally vulnerable would help to kind of make the situation of mutually assured destruction a viable one, where there was the equal chance that each country would be totally devastated by a nuclear exchange. I think you see where I'm coming from and why, according to the Wikipedia article, shelters have not been built. Well, that should not stop you from building your own shelter or protecting yourself in any way. I just think both countries stop promoting that kind of shelter building. I don't know about the Soviet Union, but the United States certainly hasn't promoted the building of nuclear shelters for 20 or 30 years. So, and now perhaps that is truly the reason why. Well, let me get to this. We're already 11 minutes into our presentation. I'm just going to read a few things here and then we'll make it a day. I don't want to go over 15 minutes or 20 minutes. It says here, any study of human genetics is complicated by the long lifespan of man, the small number of offspring, and the difficulty of making long-term observations. Radiation genetic studies in man encounter a further difficulty in the fact that although dominant mutations express themselves in the next generation, recessives may lie hidden for many generations. Enough work has been done with mice to show that mutations are produced in them by radiation, but quantitative estimates of the genetic hazards of radiation to man have had to be based largely on the fruit fly and other organisms that are not closely related to man or even to mammals. However, radiation-induced gene mutation rates have been shown to be about the same magnitude over a wide range of organisms. It is therefore reasonable to assume that a similar rate would be found in man. I guess the assumption is that the mathematical principles that govern heredity, which are fairly well known now, apply both to human beings and to the fruit fly or to the mice that they are using as studies. And that may very well be true. On the basis of this rate and of estimates of the rate of naturally occurring mutations in man, published estimates of the dose that might be expected to double the gene mutation rate in man range from as low as 3 Roentgens to as high as 300 Roentgens. And it is conceivable that the true value lies outside these limits. Okay, in other words, much lower or much higher. That's a lot of uncertainty. Since there is so much uncertainty about such a basic behavior as this, not to mention the many other factors that would enter into an evaluation of the total effects of a given increase in mutation rate, it is apparent that at present, as one investigator has said, no judgments of the genetic consequences of radiation in man can be taken very seriously. Now, I forgot to mention, I think, that I'm reading from a book that was issued in a revised form in 1950 called The Effects of the Atomic Bomb. This was published by the military in conjunction with Los Alamos National Laboratory. So what I'm trying to say is a lot has happened since then. we may know more about the genetic effects than we did a few years after the dropping of the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima and the second atomic bomb on Nagasaki. I'll just read one or two other paragraphs here and then we're going to call it a night. In the face of the large number of gaps in our knowledge, it is hard to arrive at meaningful practical recommendations. Some guidance may be derived from an important point which has emerged from experimental work. There is a large body of data which indicate that any dose of radiation, no matter how small, increases the probability of genetic changes. And interestingly, I think that is more the modern viewpoint. People are terrified by even a little increase in radiation. So this is sort of bolstering that viewpoint. Until recently, the risk would have been thought to apply mainly to distant descendants. New information on the frequency of partial dominance indicates that the risk may not be negligible even to the first generation. Incomplete experimental work as reported thus far has shown that the rate of induction of at least certain types of chromosomal aberrations is much greater in mice than it is in the fruit fly. However, if the mice are not bred until sometime after exposure to radiation, the frequency of such chromosomal aberrations is greatly reduced. The practical conclusion can therefore be drawn that the probability of passing on chromosomal aberrations to the next generation will be greatly reduced if individuals exposed to high doses of radiation refrain from begetting offspring for a period of 2 to 3 months following exposure. It should, however, be stressed that according to the evidence available from experimental work, this practice would cause little or no reduction in the risk of transmitting gene mutations. That seems like a contradiction to me. They're saying first it's a good idea, and then they're saying it's not going to have any effect. Well, that's something I can't quite figure out. I'll let you hash it out in your own minds, but let's just say that it looks like it might be a better practice in general not to have children or delay having children for a few months after a nuclear event. Now I'm going to sign off on that note, and hopefully we will be able to continue these presentations. I've shortened them a bit so that they will be more accessible to people with, whose schedules are tight or for one reason or another don't want to sit through a half-an-hour presentation. My name is Peter Duveen, and this is the program Civil Defense. I thank you for joining us tonight, and I hope you will be able to see us in our next installment, which will probably be tomorrow evening. Thank you very much, and have a great evening.